Welcome to another episode of CYC Youth Chat. Today on the panel we've got Sam, Gabriella, Michelle and Mark. Today's topic of discussion is trusting in God's plan. I'd like to start with this one verse from Proverbs 16 verse 9. A man's heart plans his way, but the Lord directs his steps. Now this verse really touched me when I read it, and I'm sure it's going to direct our talk today. I'd like to start with the first question to you guys. So often we find ourselves burdened with a problem that we cannot solve, and we look for earthly solutions. Is there anything wrong with that? Or is that something that we shouldn't do? I'll start with you, Mark. What do you think?
Thanks, Andrew. I think, it's earthly solutions that we find very, convenient are like going to our family members or friends, because we think, we can confide in them. But because it's kind of like unfathomable to think that, it's so easy to just talk to God by just kneeling down. We don't have to go through I heard something really nice like a couple of weeks back where it's like to get to the Queen you have to go through do a whole security check, and then you have to get they'd look at your background. It takes months and months before you can even just to say hello to her. And the same thing with going into the White House and stuff. But with God it's like you just sign in, sign the cross and you bow down and you're talking to him. It's something like it's so incomprehensible kind of thing. But I think that is the way to go. With men, it's like man says, something else I heard that was really nice. It says, man says, show me and I'll trust you. But God says, trust me and I'll show you. So I think it's a beautiful idea, just to put our trust in God and he will show us, that verse that says, ask whatever in my name and you shall receive. So I think, God is the answer to everything.
But I think the reason why we would resort to these earthly solutions is because, we know that God has a plan for our life. I think that there's not, many people who don't know that. We hear it in Sunday school, we learn it in church. It always comes up on our news feed on Facebook, that verse from Jeremiah, for I know the plans that I have for you. But it's one thing to know it and it's another thing to trust it. And when you trust it, that means you're accepting it for your own life. And I think that's one thing that a lot of the youth struggle with, because the reason why they resort to these earthly solutions is because they don't trust in that plan. And when you don't trust, you can't go to God. So I think that's something that a lot of youth have problems with.
So what are some earthly solutions that people resort to, say Michelle, are there any things that you can think of?
I think the most common ones that I can think of would probably be going to our family and friends. Although that is a very good thing, sometimes we can rely on that a bit too much. So instead of going to our family and friends all the time, maybe we should seek guidance in our confession father or our spiritual guidance, so that way we can get God's point of view as well.
But I think the most obvious one, earthly solution, is ourselves kind of thing. I like to have everything in my own control. So say for example I'm studying for an exam, I'll plan out my timetable to make sure that I manage it perfectly and I get this amount of topics done and stuff. If I don't put that, it's a synergy with God kind of thing. You do the work and God will put more.
That doesn't happen overnight.
Sometimes we just want all the control in our own hands kind of thing, and that's where we trust it, but not in God's hands.
So that sort of leads on to the next point. How do we practically accept and trust in the Lord's plan for our life?
I was just going to say, I think it's very, very important to sort of pay attention to God. I think that verse, be still and know that I am God, that you have to understand that you can't talk to God and God won't talk to you if you're not focusing on him. That you have a plan for him and God has that plan for you, and that you're not going to even remotely come close to it if you're sitting there and taking other things into account. Most importantly, your own opinion and your own things. If you say to yourself, I think this is the right way, but then you say to yourself, I haven't really consulted God. I haven't really asked, I haven't really prayed about it. I haven't really talked to my confession father. I haven't really, spent quiet time and, really talked to God about this problem and, asked him about it. Then you got to understand that you're not going in with the right mentality.
Of course, yeah. No, I feel a lot of, from what I understand or what I've observed, a lot of people are I'm in this massive problem. I don't know what I should do. But you find that, you can't just say that if you haven't tried the medicine. It's when you're sick and you're I feel so sick, and they give you the medicine, but you don't want to take it. You just keep complaining about feeling sick. Yeah. So I think it's something that, I was thinking about that the other day, and I was thinking, how are you supposed to be able to, the medicine's right in front of you. You're not willing.
You're not willing.
So you have to be able to search your heart and say, am I willing to trust God? Am I willing to accept that? And if you aren't, that's something that you have to pray for. You have to pray for God to search your heart and to know your heart, and you have to be completely honest with God. Even though He knows everything, but you have to be honest. You have to be completely, like, you have to unravel yourself in that presence.
I think one issue, especially relating to youth, is when you come to God, you need to have patience.
Yeah.
Of course,
And I must admit, like, especially myself being a youth, you know, things come to me so quickly. I'm always in a rush. I don't take time in my day to sit with God. And like, as the Bible says, God talks to us in quiet whispers. You know, we expect God to show us these massive signs about what we should do with our lives, when we should be taking the time, and everything happens in God's timing. Whereas by going to worldly measures, it's all happening in our timing.
Yeah.
So we need to understand that by being patient, we need to wait for God's timing to affect our lives and God's will to affect our lives.
And I think also the problems that we have in our lives are caused by the world, you know, like we can't deny that fact. Like God, how can God, who created the world, not be able to be the one that we should, like, how can we not go to God who created the world when we have problems in our lives? Like it says in one of the chapters in John, I think John 16, where it says, in the world you'll have tribulation, but be of good cheer, because I have overcome the world. And I think that's just a beautiful verse. Like it's kind of God calling us to come to Him and talk to Him and tell Him about all our problems, kind of thing.
I think also consistency is a big thing. I think that a lot of the youth struggle with being consistent in their spiritual life, praying every day, reading your Bible every day, quiet time every day. Like a lot of people, like Michelle said, you know, get caught up in the busyness of life. But I think once you're consistent and you persevere, God makes those extra steps and He puts those blessings. And you see, once you're focusing on God, you see the way that He works in your life, even if it doesn't happen overnight. And it's something that, like, I think perseverance is such a big thing. You have to be ready to persevere, and you have to be ready to beg from Christ. Don't leave until you have that. Like you see in the Psalms, David, like he'll be honest and he'll be scared and he's terrified about his future. But at the end, you always see that he comes to a sense of peace and a sense of joy and praising God. So you know that God, He's not going to leave you just, oh yeah.
How do we differentiate? Like, how do we know if it's God's plan that is being put in front of me, or if it's like some worldly plan? How do we know, or are the two like the same? How do we differentiate?
Yeah, I think that's something that's really, really...
I don't think like us as being youth can really explain that. I think it takes, as Gabriella said, it takes a lot of perseverance for our will and God's will to be the same. And it takes a lot of dedication in prayer and fasting. But I think to realise if something happens in my life, whether it's God's will or my will, I think that takes prayer. And as I said, consulting with your confession father, because he can give you the right advice about what you should do. And only through prayer will you find the true answer.
And in quiet time you get like messages from God. And,
I think Sam touched on it and he said it perfectly. Like we need to spend that quiet time with God. And it's like someone was saying it to me recently that, like, I was asking the same question and he was saying to me, like, if you spend enough time with God, if you spend enough quiet time just reading His Word, then like the answers will come. You'll just know. It's not like you'll be fooling yourself to think that I know all the answers by my own ability. But if you spend the time with God, then the answers will come to you.
We also we have to understand that we've got, like, we're baptized and we've got the Holy Spirit inside of us. So like there's always that feeling of, you know, something's not right. Like if we do something and we know it's, so we have this sort of feeling within ourselves. It's like when we sin and we just have that feeling of guilt within ourselves. It's the same thing. If we make a decision and it's not the right decision, we're not going to feel right about it. We're going to feel like, you know, I'm not really going into this with the right thing.
But what if there's a false sense of peace that's been put there from about, like, that's what I struggle with personally. Like, I never know. I'm like, is this genuine? Is it me making myself think that it is because it was what my heart desired? Is that, how do you differentiate between that? I think that's something that I struggle a lot with. I never know. I just...
Yeah, sometimes we struggle when God's plan doesn't turn out to be our plan. Like, how do we overcome that? That's like...
that comes down to your own view. So you gotta have to understand that, like, see, me personally, I make no plans in my own life. I'm very, very loose, and, you know, I'm pretty sure that God is very angry with me right now. But, you know, like, I'm the type of person that I don't like to build up hope for myself, and just in case I make it fall.
No, I think that's good to some degree, but you know, you have to have desires in your heart, like it says.
Of course. And
we just have to, like, it's important that I think it's important that we have those desires, like those wishes that we can go to God with, kind of thing.
Another question I want to ask is, how do we know that we're genuinely trusting in God, and how do we know in our hearts that we trust that plan that He's given us?
Yeah, that's something I question all the time. I'm like, how do I know? Because I know I want to trust Him, and I know that but how do I know if that's a genuine need, like, or if that's a genuine submission to Christ? Because one minute I'll make this decision, and that doesn't reflect the fact that I've submitted my will to Christ. So how?
I think it comes down to making a decision that you don't want to make. It's like when we say that our will is completely different to God's will. I think it comes down to when we know that we really don't want to do this, and we know that it's not really part of what we want, but we're going to do it for God's will.
So yeah, sacrifices.
That's at the start.
Yeah.
Sacrifices are very important. Like God Himself made a sacrifice for us, like sending His only begotten Son to die on the cross for us. Like that's a huge sacrifice. And why shouldn't we be trying to follow in the footsteps of Christ? Like it says in Philippians 2, I'll paraphrase the kind of thing. Like Christ, who was equal to God, did not exploit His status as God, but rather emptied Himself and humbled Himself for the sake of to the point of death, to the point of obedience. Even to obedience to the point of the cross kind of thing. So like, I think that's what we should be doing. That's what we should be aspiring to do for our brethren, like people, like brothers and sisters in Christ, like humbling ourselves for them.
And I think the whole idea of sacrifice as well.
That's as far as I know.
Like at the start, it's gonna feel like you have to go out of your way to do it. But
Definitely.
I think down the track, once you become closer to God, it's not like you're giving up something. It's more like you're doing it because you love Him. He's your friend. Like if your friend called you up today and asked you, "Oh, can you help me with this assignment or something?" You'd give him all the time he or she needed. So that's what God's like. I think when you get closer to Him,
It's
you're
synergy, so He's constantly moving
I have
towards you.
the
as well.
perfect example for this, just quickly. So I went on a camp recently, and we went with younger kids, and to see, like, when we're eating, it was all vegetarian because we're fasting. And they're complaining because why can't we eat the food that the other kids eat? But as you grow older, you see the attitude of your fasting change because you not only become used to it, but you understand why you're doing it. You understand why you're giving up the sacrifice.
And it becomes a spiritual act.
It
rather
does.
than just
It becomes a spiritual act that you're showing your love for God. You're showing Him thanks because of what He did for us.
Of course.
So obviously, like, as you grow up, that tends to change. And I think that's a perfect example. As time goes on, that sacrifice doesn't feel like a burden or something you have to do, but it becomes something you want to do out of love.
Like just on that, like, and that point and what Nads was saying, Andrew was saying before about sacrificing something for your friend. Like, I think it goes back. Like, I'm gonna go back to Sam Heaps because he keeps putting all the good points. But he was saying, like, doing something, making a decision in your life that you don't want to make. So like, it's not so much sacrificing for just your friends, but for those who persecute you, for those who curse you, for those enemies of yours. Like, they're the ones that Christ came for as well. Like, he didn't just come to save the righteous, He came to bring the sinners to repentance, like the wicked. So I think, like, that's the burden that we should be carrying, kind of.
Yeah,
And
of
after
course.
we
And
do
it's
that,
not
we
even a
truly
burden,
know.
yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
And because once you've sacrificed that thing, you know that it's because God has something better in store for you. So
Yeah,
like,
especially when
it's
you like,
at the
hate
time,
that
yeah.
person and you're like, I'm not doing anything for them, but then you do it and you go to God and you say, like, give me something in return. I think that's when, God kind of has compassion upon you. Like,
And that's when
God
you truly
close
know
up.
that you trust in God. And that's
Yeah.
when you truly know that, I'm trusting in His plan because I've done something I don't want to do, but I'm going to do it for you. And He's going to reward you.
And I think God, yeah, exactly. God looks upon you and He looks upon you with love and compassion. And I think that's those sacrifices are the ones that move God's heart. That's really important to make them.
All right, I think we've hit half time now, and we'll wrap it up. We'll see you guys in the next segment, but we've had a pretty good chat so far. See you soon. Welcome back to the second segment of CYC Youth Chat. Now, as you already know, we've been discussing trusting in God's plan, and I'd like to get straight into it. So this is a question that a lot of people have asked me, and I've heard a lot around the church, and it is this: when we make wrong decisions and we have the feeling that we've completely messed up, how do we fix that and practically get right back onto God's plan and realign ourselves on that right track? How do we do that, guys?
I think one important thing that we always tend to forget, especially when things go wrong or right, no matter what happens, we always need to thank God first. In everything we do, we need to thank God first. And I think that's one of the first steps that we need to take in terms of going from a wrong path to a right path. Thank God for what has happened, and then ask Him to guide us on the new path. Ask Him to guide us to help fix whatever happened, kind of thing.
I think acknowledging your weakness, acknowledging that you've just hit rock bottom, that you are nothing without Christ. Because obviously, I personally think that when you go off the plan, it's more because of pride and arrogance, thinking that, you know, you could have done it better yourself. I feel like that's the only explanation for going off that plan. So I think once you pray for humility, you just go to God, you know, bare, and just say, you know, God, I'm nothing. And once you do that, that is an act of submission. You beg for him to search your heart, and you beg and you beg and you persevere, even if you feel like God isn't hearing you. It's something you have to persevere. You can't say like, oh, I've stuffed up this much, there's no way I can get back on the track. God's not going to listen to me now. But no, God always has open arms. Like, you just have to repent, you have to strip down, and once you've done that and you've made that decision and you've made that turning point, you repent and you go to your confession father.
What mechanisms do we have in place to make sure that we're staying on that plan? What do you guys do?
I think it's like self-reflection. It's a very big thing, and like I think personally, like, we don't do it enough.
Yeah.
And I think that it's definitely something that we feel is like, and when people say, oh, I write in a journal or something, that we sort of, you know, create all these stigmas and all these different stereotypes on them and whatnot. But like, I know that the really spiritual people, that they sit down, you know, even if it's once every day or even twice or 3 times every day, and they just sit down and contemplate on what they've done wrong and how to, you know, fix themselves up and how to, you know, have a better relationship with Christ. I think that's really important, that at least for us, at the end of every day, before we even say a prayer or before we even, you know, as we're praying, just sit down and to think, you know, what deliberate things or what sins have I committed today? Why have I committed them? And how, you know, if I was to come across the same situation tomorrow, how would I, you know, avoid committing that sin and avoid steering away from God? And that's like the key, just self-reflection.
And I think what Michelle said was like about thanking God is such an appropriate answer. You know, like, because God is so, like, he's so forgiving, especially like when we fall off the track in terms of in regards to a sinful matter kind of thing. Like, he offers us forgiveness, and like he always offers us a way back on the track. It's like when I was thinking about it, it was like going skiing last year. We went on a ski trip. And it was like I went skiing with Andrew for a little while. Andrew's like a professional skier. I'm you know, skiing with my face the whole time. Like, you know, like I kept trying to pick it up. We were going on this like front valley thing, this long route kind of thing, and I kept stacking it and falling onto the side. But Andrew kept coming and picking me back up, and they were like, very Christ-like of you, Andrew. Like that's exactly how God treats us, kind of thing. Like, every time we fall, God's there to pick us back up every single time. So I think, like, we should always trust that everything he does, like good and bad, he does in our lives is part of his will. And as well, like, with every cross that we carry, God himself showed us that after every cross there's a resurrection. So I think that in itself is you know, enough to thank him for.
Yeah.
Now, there are some examples in the Bible I just want to refer to now. If we look at Noah, Noah, yeah. When he was given the plan, you know, build the ark, or when Jonah was given the plan, you know, go to the Ninevites, or when Joseph was completely, you know, tossed on the side of the road and didn't know what to do, what do you think they did? What did they do to get themselves back onto that plan? Like, what did they have in place to make sure that they kept to God's plan?
Well, you can see with, like, I think they would have had enormous faith that God will lift them up again. Like Noah, imagine like having to build an ark with the whole world against you. You would have had to have a huge amount of faith to be able to trust that God was going to.
But for me personally, I can relate more to Jonah, like completely rejecting God's will for my life. You know, like Jonah, like Noah and Joseph both had, like Gabriella was saying, enormous faith in God. Like they didn't deviate at all from his path and his will for their lives. But Jonah, like he heard God's voice and he rejected it, kind of thing. Like
scared,
he was scared. I think that's more like me. But like I said, like Michelle was saying, like just being thankful that God can provide a way back. And in Jonah's situation, I think, you know, he was very blessed. You know, the fact that he got eaten by fish, and that even a fish took him back. Like it's amazing what God can do to bring us back on track.
Just like, because with all those three, and even like with many more in the Bible, what you'd find is also once God gave them a plan or gave them something to do, with every decision they made after that, they always thought, how is this, like, what I choose, how will that glorify God? How will that thank God? How will that help me get closer to God? So Noah knew that by building the ark, he will be blessed by God, because God promised him that. Even with Jonah, eventually he realized that he is doing God's will and he will be blessed by that. And Joseph, by the end as well, he ended up being blessed by God as well.
Yeah.
So in every decision we make, whether it's a daily one or something major that will affect our lives forever, we always need to take a minute to think, will this glorify God? How will this affect my relationship with God?
Yeah, no, I agree. And the verse that goes complete with that, and it's a bit over, like, you hear it all the time, so you never really take much notice of it. But if you really, really contemplate on it, it's such a beautiful verse. Like, trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. But in all your ways, acknowledge him and he'll make your path straight. And that's the condition. In all your ways, you must acknowledge him for that verse. Everyone's like, oh, trust in the Lord with all your heart. But you must acknowledge him in every single, even if it's a little decision, a tiny one. But it must, and I remember a sermon in, it was in Passion Week a few years ago, and he was saying, everything you should do, you should keep in mind what your focus is, what your aim is, what your cross is. Is this decision that you're going to make get you to heaven? Or if it's not, and it may seem a bit drastic, like, oh, is going to this party going to get you to heaven? Like, it's just a party. But, it's an accumulation of those things that once you let yourself slip, you keep falling. So it's really important, I think, to just make sure that you...
I agree, and I think it's also important to be patient with God.
Yeah.
Like with Jonah, Joseph, and Noah, the one thing they had in common was that they were all tried and tested, and they had to persevere and be patient. Like Noah had to build an ark.
And how many years was that?
Exactly, that must have taken ages, and then he had to wait as well when they were on the boat to find dry land. Joseph waited 13 years. Jonah himself was 3 days in the well, and there was a really cool quote I read last week. It's like, Joseph waited 13 years, Abraham waited 25 years. Moses waited 40 years. Jesus himself waited 30 years. So if God keeps you waiting, then you're in good company. I think, just be patient with God, and He'll give you the grace.
Yeah, and what's you're constant with that, them three and everyone else in the Bible, is that they really thought spiritually. They didn't think realistically.
Yeah.
Like if we would come to us, God would come to us today, be like, build me an ark. We'd be like, no.
It's not logical. Yeah, everything these days.
It's not logical. There's no way it's happening. It's just not. And same thing with even with Moses, when God said to him, go speak to Pharaoh. And Moses would be like, it's not, he said, it's not realistic, it's not logical. Yeah. Same Mary, you'll be a virgin, you're going to have a baby. But that's the thing, we have to understand that, I can do all things through Christ, and God is just God above all. So whenever we feel that, we can't do anything, whenever we feel that, you just got to understand that you've got to think spiritually, not realistically.
Yeah. Man, and that Moses story always trips me out. It's like, I pray to God, get 500,000 or 5 million people across the water. I'm expecting, jet planes coming across, picking us up. The last thing I would expect is God to split the seas. Yeah. And even God himself doesn't, he's above logic, when he fed the 5,000 men, and that's men alone, how many women and children were there as well, it has to add up to about 20,000 people. And he fed them all. He asked his disciples first to feed them. It's ridiculous. That's what God is asking for us. It's something outrageous. He's asking us to do something outrageous, just to trust in him. That's the least we can do, I think.
And if God does bless us, we find that in our lives that there are small things that He blesses us with, but how do we remind ourselves of those, or how do we make sure that we don't fall into, say, sin of pride? Because sometimes He blesses us, but then we get to this high point and we're like, oh yeah, God did this because I did whatever.
Of course. I think from what I was saying before, every morning when you go to God, even if you feel like you don't mean it, you must just try and be humble towards Him. I am nothing. I'm nothing. God, if you compare yourself to all the planets and all the beauty in the world and all, the saints, you are nothing. And you got to remind yourself that you were nothing before that. And those blessings came around to you because of that submission. So you have to, and it's a constant reminder, so many times we fall into that pride, but you just need to constantly remind yourself. We were listening to a sermon the other day, and it was saying success is never permanent because we always fall into that sin of pride, and then it always wears away because pride can snatch away all the virtues from you. So you need to every day, I can't stress how important that is. But even if sometimes you don't mean it, just say, please God, help me to mean this. Please God, and in the sermon last week they were saying, it's enough to want to change. It's enough to want to be submissive. It's enough for God. So you need to keep that in mind, and you need to persevere.
Yeah, it's definitely a daily thing. There's a verse that says, "Be clothed with humility." If you think about it, human terms, when you put on clothes, you don't put put it on at the beginning of the year and then like change at the end of the year kind of thing. It's a daily thing. You're always changing. Like even night, you're changing many times. So you always have to be constantly asking God for that humility. Like always in the morning, it's a willing thing. You have to tell yourself, okay, today, like I'm gonna be humble in the face of someone cursing me or someone persecuting me or someone asking me to do something like that's not meant for me. Kind of like those constantly reminding yourself to be humble in that, and God will give you the strength. I think that just constantly doing it every day, like Gabriella was saying.
And like that humility teaches you to acknowledge Him in everything that you do. And in doing that, God will make your path straight. Like I said, there's a verse in Isaiah or Psalm, I can't remember, it was saying, he who dwells in the secret place of the Most High will be under the shadow of the Almighty. And if you think about it in like a more like a practical sense, so he who dwells in the shadow of in the secret place of the Most High, so that's just in your room praying all the day, being with God all the time. You will be under the shadow of Christ. Once you're under that shadow, you can stay on that. Like you can't see outside the shadow, so you know that's the path.
One last thing. I want to get your contemplation that the theme verse that we've had. So the theme verse for this episode today is a man's heart plans his way, but the Lord directs his steps. Just any thoughts on that?
I think like it's just like what we said in terms of, you know, we have our own sort of path, and we think that we've had our own sort of will, and that, you know, this is what I want to do today, and you know, I need to get this and this done. But above all is, you know, it's God's plan for us that counts. And you know, and if we are not in line with His plan, then we're gonna, you know, come across some, you know, really rocky roads, some sticky situations. And I actually asked a priest in our church. I said to him, you know, like all the really holy people, you know, why are they so at peace? Like why when you know, it's like, I know most of them go through a lot of tribulation, but you just see that, you know, a lot of the holy people, you go and talk to them and they're just such at peace. And I asked him why, and he said, the closer you get to God, the more aligned your wills are, and the more accepting they are of His will. Because they know in their mind that God's will and God's plan for you is the best possible plan that anyone could come up with. You know, if you were to get a whole bunch of people and to come up with a plan for you, you know, there was nothing that would compare to God's plan for you. And once you realize that, once you understand that there is no other plan in the world for me that can fit me perfectly, and that this is the only plan that, you know, God has for me, then that's it. Then you'll come to the realization that I don't need anything else but God. And that's what we need to like understand.
And it's all founded on the heart, like that verse says. Like if my heart desires to do good, then God will help me do good. If my heart desires to do not the opposite of good, or wicked or anything, then God won't be there to support me. So everything Sam said is perfect. I agree with everything. I just think that it all depends on the desire of our heart.
But what if you have a bad desire? Where do you go from there? Is that us? Because I think that throws off a lot of people when they say, I've got a bad desire.
Like you said, it's enough to want to do good.
Yeah.
So like if it's your desire to want to do good, then that's enough.
And I think here it's important, like it says it will direct his steps. So you think about the day, how many steps do you make? Like it's you can't count it. Like throughout your whole life, you don't know how many steps you've made. But the point is that He thinks about every single one of those steps. And no matter what, if you step on mud, or you step on asphalt, or you step on any surface, and that may represent like the tough times in your life or the easy times, God's going to be with you walking those steps. And if He needs to, He'll carry you up and pick you up and make sure you get through that. So I think that really touched me, that verse. But I'd really like to thank you guys for coming to this episode today. It's been a very fruitful discussion, and you know, we've gained some really interesting points on God's plan. And I'll see you guys soon, next episode.